They called it a joke. Her siblings rolled their eyes when their father left her a crumbling gas station instead of cash. Take the 25,000 and walk away, they said. But the moment she found the brass key and unlocked the underground door, they realized she had not inherited junk. She had inherited a $200 million secret that could destroy them all. But before we get to that key, before we get to the hidden door and the fortune and the betrayal that would tear the Calloway family apart forever, we need to go back, 6 weeks back, to a woman named Grace Calloway standing in a diner at 6 in the morning with aching feet and coffee stains on her uniform, who had no idea that her entire life was about to change. The fluorescent lights of Benny's diner flickered overhead as Grace balanced 3 plates of scrambled eggs and hash browns along her forearm. Her uniform carried the evidence of a double shift that had started before dawn. Small grease stains near the collar, a smear of ketchup on the sleeve she had not noticed yet. Dark circles carved shadows beneath her eyes, but she kept her smile warm and steady for every table she served. That was the thing about Grace Calloway. No matter how tired she was, no matter how much her back screamed or her feet throbbed, she smiled. Not because she felt like smiling, but because the people sitting in those booths deserved someone who gave a damn about their morning. She was 38 years old. She lived in a 2-bedroom apartment with a water stain on the ceiling that her landlord had promised to fix 4 months ago. She drove a 15-year-old sedan with peeling paint and a passenger door that sometimes refused to open. She had 2 daughters, twins, 12 years old, and she loved them with a ferocity that frightened her sometimes because it was the only thing in her life that had never wavered. "Order up for table 7, she called, sliding the plates in front of a family of tourists passing through town. "Can I get you folks anything else?" The father glanced up from his phone. "We are good," he said, already looking back down. Grace nodded and moved to her next table, checking her watch. 2 more hours until her shift ended. Then she had to pick up the girls from school, make dinner, and come back for the evening shift she had picked up to cover rent. The math of her life was simple and brutal. Every hour she worked kept them 1 step ahead of the bills. Every hour she missed pushed them 1 step closer to the edge. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. Normally, Grace would never check her phone during a shift. Her manager, a tight-lipped man named Phil, who tracked bathroom breaks like a prison warden, had made that policy abundantly clear. But the screen showed the name of her daughter's school, and Grace Calloway did not ignore calls from her daughter's school. She stepped away from her table with a quick apology and answered, "Miss Calloway, this is Principal Weston. I am calling about Juniper." Grace felt her stomach drop. The feeling was immediate, physical, like missing a step on a staircase. "Is she all right?" "She is fine physically." "But there was an incident with another student. Apparently there were some comments made about your family's living situation," and Juniper responded rather forcefully. Grace closed her eyes. She hit someone? No. But her verbal response was quite colorful. "We need you to come in for a meeting." Grace glanced across the diner at Phil, who was already watching her with that look. The look that said he was calculating how much her absence would cost him and whether she was worth the trouble. "I am working a double today," Grace said into the phone. "Could we possibly schedule something for tomorrow?" "Miss Calloway, this is the 3rd incident this month. I will be there in 30 minutes, Grace said. She ended the call and crossed the diner to where Phil stood behind the register, arms folded. The conversation lasted 90 seconds. Phil did not yell. He did not need to. He simply informed Grace that one more unplanned absence this month would put her employment under review, and that he had a stack of applications from people who could show up reliably. Grace thanked him, removed her apron, and walked to her car, her hands shaking with the particular cocktail of anger and humiliation that had become so familiar it barely registered anymore. As she pulled out of the parking lot, her phone rang again. The screen displayed a name that made her grip the steering wheel tighter. Russ. Her brother rarely called. When he did, it was never good news and never delivered gently. She hesitated, then answered on speaker. "Grace, where are you? We have been trying to reach you all morning." Russell Calloway's voice was sharp, clipped, the voice of a man who had assistants and conference calls and a corner office with a view of the Potomac. A man who had never in his adult life worried about whether he could afford both groceries and gas in the same week. "I am working, Russ. Some of us have jobs that do not come with someone to answer our phones." He ignored this. "Dad's attorney called. They have scheduled the will reading for tomorrow at 2. Grace felt something tighten in her chest. It had been 6 weeks since their father's heart attack, 6 weeks since the phone call from the hospital that had split her life into before and after, 6 weeks of grief that she had been forced to compress into the margins of her days because bills did not pause for mourning and her daughter still needed to eat. Emmett Calloway had been her anchor, the quiet, steady presence who never made her feel less than. When her siblings looked at her and saw a failure, a college dropout who married the wrong man and ended up waiting tables at 38, her father looked at her and saw something else, something he never needed to name because it was always there in his eyes. Now he was gone, and the wound was still so raw that some mornings she woke up and forgot just for a second, and the remembering hit her all over again like the first time. "I have a shift tomorrow," she said. "Cancel it," Russ replied. "This is important, Grace. The whole family will be there." By the whole family, Grace knew he meant himself, their sister Diane, and their respective spouses, the successful branches of the Calloway family tree. Not her ex-husband, Troy, who had left her for his receptionist 3 years ago and now lived in a lakeside condo while she counted quarters for laundry. "I will try," she said, "but I cannot promise anything." Russ sighed and the sound crackled through her car's aging speakers like static from another world. "This is exactly why Dad worried about you, Grace. You never prioritize the right things. Diane and I have been handling all the funeral arrangements, the estate paperwork, everything. While you have been doing what pouring coffee." The words landed exactly where he intended them to land. "I will be there," Grace said and ended the call before he could twist the knife further. She sat in the school parking lot for a full minute, breathing, composing her face into something that would not frighten her daughter. This was her life now, racing between a job that barely tolerated her and children who needed more than she could give, enduring her siblings' contempt, grieving alone for the only person who had ever truly been in her corner. The meeting with Principal Weston went exactly as Grace expected. June sat stone-faced in the corner of the office, chin raised, tears shimmering in her eyes but refusing to fall. The other student, a girl named Kelsey, whose mother chaired the PTA and drove a car worth more than Grace's annual salary, had reportedly told June that her clothes probably came from a dumpster. June's response had been, according to the principal, quite creative in its profanity and remarkably specific in its personal observations about Kelsey's character and family. "I understand June's response was not appropriate," Grace said carefully, choosing each word, "but it sounds like she was being bullied about our financial situation. We are speaking with Kelsey's parents as well, of course. But given Juniper's pattern, we are recommending counseling. Counseling they could not afford. Another expense to squeeze from a budget that was already wrung dry. We will work on it at home," Grace promised. As they walked to the car, June finally spoke. "I am not sorry," she said. Her voice was small but iron. "She says that stuff all the time, every single day." "I know it is hard," Grace said, "but we cannot let people like that see they have gotten to us. Grandpa would have let me fight back." June climbed into the back seat. He said, "Sometimes you have to stand up for yourself, and anyone who tells you different has never had to." Grace felt grief wash over her, a sudden and heavy, because the words sounded exactly like her father. The cadence, the quiet defiance. June had inherited it directly, and hearing it now from her 12-year-old daughter was like hearing Emmett Calloway speak from beyond the grave. That night, after the twins were fed and homework was supervised and teeth were brushed and the apartment was finally quiet, Grace should have slept. Tomorrow would be another long day. Instead, she found herself sitting at the kitchen table in the dark, a single lamp casting yellow light across the photo album her father had given her last Christmas. "So you remember where you come from," he had said, pressing it into her hands. His voice still carried the faint Virginia drawl he had never lost, despite decades of quiet, disciplined living. The album told the story of Emmett Calloway's life in photographs. There he was as a young man in uniform, sharp-eyed and lean, standing in front of a military transport. There he was, years later, older civilian clothes, now grinning broadly on the day he purchased North Star gas station, his hand resting on the pump like he was touching something sacred. Grace is a toddler sitting on his shoulders at that same station. Family picnics at the lake. Birthday cakes with too many candles. Graduations Emmett had attended in the same navy blazer he wore to everything, pressed and proud. The last photograph was recent. Emmett with the twins at their 12th birthday party 6 months before his heart gave out. Looking at it now, Grace could see what she had missed then. The fatigue pooling beneath his eyes, the slight hollowing of his cheeks, the way his smile, usually so effortless, seemed to require concentration. He had known. He must have known something was wrong even then, and he had said nothing because that was who Emmett Calloway was. A man who carried his burdens silently so that the people he loved would not have to. Grace closed the album and pressed her hand flat against the cover as if she could reach through the photographs and touch him one more time. "I miss you, Pop," she whispered into the empty kitchen. The only answer was the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a neighbor's television through the thin walls. The next day dawned gray and drizzling, matching the weight in Grace's chest as she prepared for the will reading. She had called in sick for her morning shift. Phil had been understanding in the way that a man who has already decided to fire you is understanding. "One more absence this month, Grace." After seeing the twins off to school with hugs that lasted longer than usual, Grace stood before her closet considering her options. She did not own many formal outfits. She settled on a simple black dress she had worn to a wedding last year, paired with her only decent pair of heels. In the mirror, she looked presentable. Tired, but presentable. She wondered when she had stopped aiming higher than presentable. Her phone rang. "Troy, I have been thinking about June's situation at school," he began. Without greeting, "Stephanie and I were talking, and we think it might be best if the girls spent more time with us. My neighborhood has better schools, better resources." "Not now, Troy. I am on my way to my father's will reading." There was a pause. "Any idea what he left you?" The question was casual, too casual. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious. He owned that gas station free and clear, right? That is a pretty valuable piece of commercial real estate depending on the zoning. So that was it." Troy was fishing. Even after 3 years, his opportunism could still surprise her, though it probably should not have. She ended the call without answering his question and finished getting ready, adding a new worry to her growing collection. If Troy thought she might be coming into money, he would use it. He always did. The attorney's office was downtown in a brick and glass building that overlooked the town's modest main street. Grace parked her aging sedan in the public garage 2 blocks away. She would not pull up beside Russ's Tesla or Diane's Range Rover. She would not give them that satisfaction. She walked to the building, clutching her father's photo album to her chest like armor. The receptionist directed her to the third floor where Gerald Fenton had practiced law for 30 years. When Grace stepped off the elevator, she spotted her family immediately. Russ stood by the window phone pressed to his ear, his posture radiating the aggressive competence of a man who moved money for a living. He had inherited their father's height and broad shoulders, but none of his warmth. Diane sat in a leather chair, legs crossed, designer sunglasses pushed up into perfectly highlighted hair, her expression set in the permanent slight frown of someone who found most things beneath her. Her husband Gerald stood beside her, scrolling through his own phone, contributing nothing as usual. No one noticed Grace arrive. She stood there for a moment, invisible, watching her family from across the waiting room. They looked like what they were: successful, polished, expensive, and entirely uninterested in the sister who had not managed to become any of those things. It was Russ who spotted her first. He lowered his phone. Finally, he said, checking his watch. Diane looked up. Her eyes swept Grace's outfit in a fraction of a second, cataloging, assessing, dismissing. "Grace," she said, "you look rested." Before Grace could respond, a door opened and Gerald Fenton appeared. He was in his mid-60s, silver-haired with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He had been Emmett's friend for decades before becoming his attorney, and when he saw Grace, his expression softened in a way that nearly broke through her composure. "Grace," he said, stepping forward to embrace her briefly, "it is good to see you. How are the girls?" "They are strong," Grace said, "like their grandfather." Fenton nodded, then turned to the others. "If you will all follow me, we are ready to begin." The conference room was wood-paneled and formal, a long table surrounded by leather chairs. Fenton took his place at the head. Grace chose a seat at the far end from her siblings, an instinct she did not examine too closely. "Thank you all for coming," Fenton began. "We are here to discuss the last will and testament of Emmett James Calloway." He opened a folder and removed several documents. "I will keep the legal language to a minimum. Emmett's will is straightforward. He had few assets, but what he had, he distributed with clear intent." Russ leaned forward. "We have been reviewing his finances, Gerald. Diane and I are prepared to handle any outstanding debts." That is generous, Fenton said mildly but not necessary. Emmett's affairs were in good order. He adjusted his glasses and began reading. To Russell Calloway, Emmett leaves his collection of military history volumes in the sum of $50,000 funded by a life insurance policy. Russ blinked. 50,000. Where would Dad get that kind of money for a policy like that? He maintained it for years, Fenton explained. Modest premiums, consistent payments. To Diane Calloway, Prescott, he leaves his collection of vinyl records in the sum of $50,000 from the same policy. Diane exchanged a glance with her husband. The records are sentimental clutter, she murmured, but the money is unexpected. Grace sat quietly wondering what her father might have left for her. A keepsake, perhaps. The photo album she already held. Some small memento of a man who had never had much, but had always given everything. Fenton cleared his throat. Now, to the primary bequest. To Grace Calloway. Emmett leaves North Star gas station and all its contents, including the attached apartment, all inventory equipment, and any other assets associated with the property. Silence. It lasted 3 seconds, but felt like 30. Grace heard the words, but could not make them fit together in any arrangement that made sense. The gas station. Her father had left her North Star, his business, his life's work, the place where she had sat on the counter as a child eating candy bars while he worked the register. Marcus broke the silence with a laugh, a single sharp, incredulous sound. The gas station, he said. He left her the gas station. Diane's expression darkened in a way Grace recognized from childhood, the way her sister's face changed when something she considered rightfully hers was given to someone else. That property is prime commercial real estate, Gerald. It is worth far more than the cash bequest to Russ and me. This is completely imbalanced. Fenton remained calm. Emmett was very specific about his wishes. This is absurd, Russ continued. Grace knows nothing about running a business. She can barely manage her own checkbook. Dad must have been confused. I assure you he was of sound mind, Fenton replied firmly. The will was updated 8 months ago, well before his health declined. He underwent a complete cognitive assessment at that time at his own request. The results are documented and available for review. Diane turned to Grace. Her eyes were narrow and calculating. What did you say to him? How did you convince him to do this? Grace found her voice. I did not say anything. I had no idea. Right, Russ interrupted. You had no idea he was leaving you a piece of commercial property worth hundreds of thousands. Fenton raised a hand. If I may continue, there is a letter from Emmett that he asked me to read aloud. The room went still. My dear children, Fenton read, his voice careful with each word. If you are hearing these words, then I have moved on to whatever comes next. I hope it is somewhere with good fishing and better coffee. Despite everything, Grace smiled. That was her father. Even in death, even in a legal document, the quiet humor. I know my decision regarding North Star may come as a surprise. Russ, Diane, you have both built successful lives. You have wealth and status and security. You do not need a struggling gas station. Grace has faced challenges that would have broken most people. A difficult divorce, raising 2 remarkable granddaughters alone, working double shifts to keep food on the table. Despite these hardships, she has never lost her kindness, her generosity, or her spine. The gas station may not seem like much. Perhaps you see it as a burden, but to me, North Star represented freedom and opportunity, and everything I built my life around. It is my legacy, and I choose to leave it to the child who I believe will honor what it means. Grace, I know this may seem overwhelming, but I have faith in you. North Star has more to offer than meets the eye. Take your time, explore, and remember that sometimes the greatest treasures hide in plain sight. To Russ and Diane, I leave you with this. True wealth is not measured in dollars or property. It is measured in the lives we touch and the love we give. I am proud of what you have accomplished, but I hope someday you will understand that success without compassion is hollow. With all my love, your father. When Fenton finished reading, the room was silent. Grace felt tears running down her cheeks. Her father's words wrapped around her like arms, like the hugs he used to give, the kind where he held on a little longer than expected, because he understood that sometimes people needed to be held longer than they would ever ask for. Russ broke the silence. His voice was tight, controlled, the voice of a man who was angry, but had spent his career learning not to show it in front of attorneys. This is ridiculous. Dad clearly was not thinking straight. That gas station has not turned a profit in years. That is not entirely accurate, Fenton said. Diane leaned toward Grace. Be reasonable. You cannot possibly want to run a gas station. Sell it to us. You could use the money for a better apartment, maybe even a small house. Think about the girls. Grace looked down at the photo album, at her father's face on the day he bought North Star. The pride in his eyes, the hand on the pump. I need time to think, she said. What is there to think about, Russ demanded. That is enough, Fenton interjected. The property belongs to Grace. What she does with it is her decision. As the meeting ended and her siblings gathered their things, Diane approached Grace one last time. Her voice was low, almost gentle, which made it worse. Think about what is best for your daughters, Grace. That place is a money pit. Russ and I will give you $25,000 for it. Clean and simple. $25,000, Grace repeated. For prime commercial real estate. Your words, not mine. Diane's smile did not reach her eyes. We are trying to help you, Grace. After everyone left, only Grace and Fenton remained. The attorney watched her with the same kind expression he had worn at the door. Your father loved you very much, Grace, I know, she whispered. Fenton reached into his briefcase and removed a small envelope. He asked me to give you this privately. He was very specific that it be given only to you after the reading when you were alone. Grace took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a single key, old-fashioned, heavy, brass, and a note in her father's handwriting. Some doors hide in plain sight. Look with your heart. Pop. She stared at the key, then at the cryptic message, then at Fenton. Did my father ever mention anything unusual about the gas station? Fenton considered this. Not unusual exactly, but he was very particular about maintaining ownership. Several developers approached him over the years with generous offers. He refused every one. He always said North Star was more than just a business to him. He paused. Whatever you decide, Grace, do not rush. Your father had his reasons for everything he did. Grace tucked the key and note into her purse, feeling the weight of both. I am not selling, she said. The words surprised her, but once they were spoken, they felt right. At least not yet. I owe it to my father to understand why this place meant so much to him. She walked out of the building into the gray afternoon. In the parking lot, she passed the spot where Russ had been standing after the reading, and she remembered something she had almost missed. A small moment. Russ had been holding the photocopy of their father's letter, and his hand had been trembling. Just slightly. Just enough that if you were not looking for it, you would never notice. For 1 second, maybe two, her brother had looked like a pawn who missed his father. Then Grace had taken a step toward him, and the mask had returned. His jaw set. His eyes went cold. Sell it to us, Grace. You do not know what you are sitting on. She had not understood what he meant by that. Not yet. Grace drove to North Star gas station as the drizzle turned to steady rain. She parked in the cracked concrete lot and sat in her car for a long time, an engine off, windshield blurring with water, staring at the place that was now improbably hers. North Star had seen better days. The star on its sign, once painted bright white against navy blue, had faded to a ghostly outline. Only one of the two pumps appeared functional. The small convenience store attached to the station had windows clouded with age and covered in outdated advertisements for cigarette brands and lottery tickets. The whole property had an air of quiet exhaustion, like a man who had worked too hard for too long and was simply waiting for permission to rest. But as Grace sat there, memories flooded back with a vividness that made her breath catch. Sitting on the counter at age 6 while her father rang up customers, learning to stock shelves as a teenager, her father's patient voice explaining inventory management as if it were the most important knowledge in the world. Bringing the twins here when they were small, watching them chase each other between the aisles while Emmett slipped them candy bars when he thought Grace was not looking. She pressed her hand against the steering wheel and felt the brass key in her pocket warm from her body heat, heavy with questions she could not yet answer. Then she opened the car door and stepped into the rain. And what Grace Calloway could not possibly have known, standing in that cracked parking lot with rain soaking through her only good dress and her father's brass key pressing against her thigh, was that the small piece of metal she carried would not just open a door. It would open the truth about her father's entire life. And that truth, when it came, would change everything she had ever believed about her family, her father, and herself. But that is a story for the next part. Now I need you to understand something about Grace Calloway before we go any further. This was not a woman who believed in fairy tales. She had stopped believing in fairy tales at 22 when the man she married looked her in the eye and promised forever and meant it for about 6 years. She had stopped believing in luck around the same time she started working double shifts. And she had certainly stopped believing that life had some grand plan for her, because if it did, the plan seemed to involve a lot of aching feet and overdue electric bills. So when Grace unlocked the front door of North Star gas station 2 days after the will reading and stepped inside with her daughters behind her, she was not expecting magic. She was expecting dust, an old inventory, and the faint smell of her father's aftershave lingering in a place where he had spent more waking hours than anywhere else on earth. The bell above the door jingled as they entered. The sound was so familiar, so specifically tied to her childhood, that Grace had to stop and breathe for a moment before she could move forward. The interior was dim. Dust motes danced in the thin beams of sunlight that managed to penetrate the grimy windows. The shelves were sparsely stocked with basics: canned goods, snacks, a few automotive supplies. The refrigerated section hummed loudly, rattling every few seconds, holding a meager selection of drinks and dairy products that probably should have been thrown away weeks ago. "It smells like Grandpa," Hazel said quietly. She was the sensitive one, the twin who channeled everything inward, who maintained perfect grades and careful neutrality, as if academic excellence could shield her from the case of the adult world. Her voice carried a softness that made Grace's heart ache. June, the other half, the twin who burned where Hazel simmered, kicked at a weed growing through a crack near the threshold. "This is ours now. Why would Grandpa give us a broken gas station?" "It is not broken," Grace corrected gently. "It just needs some care." But even as she said it, she wondered, what had her father been thinking? The station was clearly struggling. Victoria had said as much. Back taxes, outstanding loans, declining revenue. And yet Emmett had refused to sell, had turned down. Developers had clung to this modest, fading business as if it contained something precious. They explored the apartment upstairs first. It was small, but surprisingly well-maintained compared to the store below. A combined living and dining area. A compact kitchen, cleaner than Grace expected. 2 bedrooms, a bathroom with tiles from the 1970s that were somehow still charming. The furniture was old but solid. A handmade chess set sat on the coffee table, the pieces carved from 2 different types of wood. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with volumes in English. And Grace noticed with a jolt several other languages she could not identify. "It is tiny," June observed, peering into the smaller bedroom. "Where would we all sleep?" Grace hesitated. She had not actually considered moving in. But as she stood in her father's living room, surrounded by his books, in his chess set, in the faded photographs he had hung on every available wall, she felt a connection that had been missing for 6 weeks. A sense of him, present, patient, waiting for her to figure out what he had been trying to tell her. "We could make it work," she said slowly, surprising herself. They returned downstairs to the store. Grace moved behind the counter, taking in the ancient cash register, the lottery ticket machine, the shelves of cigarettes behind her. Everything looked exactly as it had when her father was alive, as if he had simply stepped out for a moment and would return any minute. "What is through there?" June asked, pointing to a door behind the counter marked private. "That is the office." The office was small. A desk, a filing cabinet, a wall calendar, still showing the month Emmett had died. Papers stacked neatly, everything in its place. Grace sat in her father's chair and ran her hands over the worn desktop, feeling the grooves and scratches of decades of use. She opened drawers, office supplies, invoices, tax documents, ordinary things. "Mom, look at this." Hazel was examining the bookshelf against the office wall. Her expression held that particular intensity she got when something did not add up. "These are not all in English," she said. "This one is in Russian, I think. And this one might be Arabic." Grace joined her daughter. Hazel was right. Mixed among the English volumes were books in at least 5 or 6 languages Grace could not immediately identify. Russian, German, Arabic, French, something that might have been Mandarin. "I did not know Grandpa spoke other languages," June said. Neither had Grace. Her father spoke English with a faint Virginia drawl and occasionally muttered under his breath in what Grace had always assumed was just grumbling. She had never heard him speak a foreign language. Not once in 38 years. The discovery unsettled her more than it should have. What else might she not have known about the man who raised her? The filing cabinet drew her attention next. The top drawer contained neatly labeled folders, invoices, receipts, insurance, all the expected paperwork of a small business. But at the back was a folder labeled simply correspondence. Inside were letters and postcards from around the world, written in various languages, some addressed to her father, others addressed to names she did not recognize. The bottom drawer was locked. Grace tried her office key. It did not fit. Then slowly she reached into her pocket and removed the brass key her father had left in the envelope. The key he had given her from beyond the grave with a note about hidden doors. It slid into the lock and turned smoothly. What was inside made no sense in the context of a gas station. A shortwave radio, a laminated card with what appeared to be encryption keys, several passports all bearing photographs of her father at various ages, but each with a different name, and a leather-bound journal, thick with entries written entirely in a code or cipher Grace could not decipher. "What is all this stuff?" June asked, leaning over Grace's shoulder. Grace held one of the passports open. The photograph was unmistakably her father, perhaps 20 years younger. But the name read William Ashford, and the issuing country was not the United States. "I think," Grace said carefully, "there was a lot more to your grandfather than any of us knew." The safe in the corner was old, a dial combination lock rather than digital. Grace knelt before it, trying dates. Emmett's birthday, her own birthday, the date he had purchased the station. None worked. "Try our birthday," Hazel suggested quietly. Grace turned the dial. 12, 24, 10. The lock clicked open. Inside were several USB drives, a stack of photographs, and a small leather pouch containing foreign currency from at least 8 different countries. The photographs showed Emmett with people Grace had never seen. Men in military uniforms with high-ranking decorations, women in professional suits, groups posed in front of buildings that looked official and important. In one photograph, her father stood beside a man whose face Grace could almost place someone she might have seen on television. Someone important, though she could not say exactly who. Grace closed the safe in the drawer, tucking the key back into her pocket. Her mind was racing, but she forced herself to stay calm. The twins were watching her with wide eyes, and she needed to be steady for them, even if she felt anything but. Over the next week, Grace split her time between the diner and the gas station, cleaning, taking inventory, trying to understand the business, while also trying to understand the mystery her father had left behind. She could not afford to quit her job yet. The will had given her a building, not a paycheck, and buildings did not feed 12-year-olds. But strange things kept happening at North Star. Customers appeared at predictable times, purchased almost nothing, and left. They came alone, spoke little, and carried themselves with a particular quality Grace could not name at first, but eventually recognized. Alertness, the kind of constant low-level awareness of a person who has been trained to notice exits and threats. A tall man with military bearing came every Tuesday at exactly 10:15 and seemed genuinely surprised when Grace could not respond to his German greeting. "Emmett did not teach you?" he asked. "That is unexpected." Unexpected. Grace documented everything in a notebook. Descriptions, times, languages spoken. She was not sure what she was tracking, but her father had been meticulous and she would be too. Then on a Tuesday morning, a woman walked into the station. She was in her mid-50s, unremarkable in appearance except for her posture, which was exceptionally straight, almost military, and her eyes, which missed nothing. She browsed the shelves with the unhurried confidence of someone who was exactly where she intended to be. "You must be Emmett's daughter," the woman said. Her voice carried a slight accent. "Eastern European." She said her name was Nadia Orlov. "You knew my father. I was a regular customer." "Your father was a special man. Irreplaceable." Something fell from Nadia's purse as she reached for her wallet. A passport. Not American. Grace bent to pick it up before Nadia could stop her. The cover bore text in Cyrillic script. "A diplomatic passport. I will take that." Nadia set her hand, extending quickly. "You are a diplomat?" Grace asked. "Just a minor consular official." She attempted a dismissive smile, but her eyes were sharp, assessing Grace's reaction. "Perhaps we could forget this small incident. Your secret is safe with us," Grace said, handing back the passport. Nadia studied her for a long moment. Then she said almost to herself, "You are very much like your father. He understood discretion. She handed Grace a business card. Plain white, only a name and phone number. No title, no organization. If you decide to keep the station running, call me. I would be happy to be your first official customer. She paused at the door. That key he left you, it does not just open a drawer. Then she was gone. Now this is the part of the story where everything Grace Calloway thought she understood about her inheritance, about her father, about her entire life, is about to change. And I want you to pay attention because what she found beneath that gas station was not just surprising. It was the kind of discovery that makes you rethink everything you thought you knew about the people closest to you, the kind that changes a person forever. That night after sending the twins upstairs, Grace returned to the station alone. Nadia's words echoed. The key does not just open a drawer. Grace moved through the office, methodically pressing the brass key against every surface, trying every lock, every panel. She pushed aside the heavy filing cabinet and found what she had been looking for. A slight discoloration in the wall paneling, a seam that should not have been there. She pressed along its edge until she heard a faint click and a small section of the panel slid aside, revealing a keyhole. Her hands were shaking as she inserted her father's brass key. The wall shuddered once almost imperceptibly and then swung inward on silent hinges, revealing a narrow corridor that led to a service elevator. Old but clearly maintained. Beside it, a numeric keypad. Grace tried the same combination that had opened the safe. 12, 24, 10. The light flashed green. She stepped into the elevator. 3 buttons, G for ground, B for basement, and a third marked with just a number. She pressed B. The elevator descended smoothly, and the duration of the drop told Grace she was traveling much farther than 1 story below ground. When the doors opened, she stood frozen in the entrance, unable to process what she was seeing. Before her was a fully equipped operations center, computer workstations, satellite communication equipment, radio systems, walls lined with filing cabinets, and maps marked with pins and notations in multiple languages. One wall displayed photographs. Her father with various officials, her father in locations she did not recognize. Her father standing beside men in uniforms decorated with the insignia of intelligence agencies from countries around the world. In the center of the room was a large table with what appeared to be secure telephone lines. The air smelled faintly of electronics and the particular staleness of a space that is climate-controlled but rarely opened. Grace moved to a workstation and pressed the power button. The screen hummed to life, requesting a password. She tried the date of the station's purchase, the numbers printed beneath a framed photograph of Emmett on opening day. The computer unlocked. Files filled the screen. Documents, databases, communication logs spanning decades. But what stopped Grace's heart was a video file on the desktop. For Grace. She clicked it, and her father appeared. He looked tired, thinner than she remembered. But his eyes were clear, steady, and looking directly into the camera with the same quiet intensity that had defined him in life. "Grace, sweetheart," he began, "if you are watching this, then you found the key, both the literal one and the figurative one. You discovered the truth about North Star, about my real work, all these years." He paused, took a breath. "What I am about to tell you will sound impossible, but every word is true. North Star gas station is not just a business. It is a CIA safe house and communication center established in 1978. When I left the military, I was not simply discharged. I was recruited. My language skills and my field experience made me valuable in ways the regular Army could not use. I taught myself 9 languages, Grace. 9. The agency gave me this station as cover. A humble veteran running a modest business. No one looked twice. Grace pressed her hand against the screen against her father's face. Over 30 years, North Star has served as a meeting point for intelligence operatives, a communication hub for classified transmissions, and a safe location for debriefing assets from around the world. Those regular customers you have probably noticed by now are active and retired intelligence personnel who still depend on this station as a secure contact point. I know this is a lot. I know you have questions. But first you need to understand the scope of what I am leaving you. Over my career, I was compensated well. Very well. Though I kept every dollar hidden even from your mother. There is approximately 50 million in offshore accounts accessible through the files on this computer. Additionally, I acquired safe house properties in 12 different countries valued at approximately 75 million. A collection of recovered artifacts and gold entrusted to me by grateful allied governments, stored in a secure facility worth approximately 40 million. And a trust fund established by the Agency for Exceptional Service containing 35 million. Grace felt the room tilt around her. The numbers were so large they lost meaning. $200 million. Her father. The man who wore the same jacket for 20 years, who drove a truck older than his grandchildren, who lived above a gas station and counted his blessings instead of his money. $200 million. Grace sat back in the chair, tears streaming, overwhelmed by pride and grief and shock in equal measure. She thought about the years of scraped-together rent payments, the nights choosing between groceries and gao, the humiliation of her siblings' pity, and all along her father had been sitting on a fortune that could have solved every problem she had ever faced. But he had chosen not to. Deliberately. And in his video he explained why. You may wonder why I live so simply. The answer is twofold. Security because my work demanded it. And values because I wanted you and your siblings to understand that the measure of a life is not what you accumulate, but what you contribute. I watched Russ and Diane chase wealth and status above everything else. I watched it hollow them out. You, Grace, despite everything, or maybe because of everything, you stayed whole. That is why I am trusting you with all of this. Grace believed in that moment that the worst was over, that the discovery would change everything for the better. A fortune, a purpose, an explanation for her father's devotion to a struggling gas station. She had found the hidden treasure, the fairy tale ending she had stopped believing in. She was wrong. The security system flashed its warning while Grace was still wiping tears from her eyes. Red text scrolling across a monitor she had not been watching. Perimeter breach, north entrance. Grace scrambled to the bank of security monitors and powered them on. 8 screens flickered to life, showing angles of the station she had never seen. Front lot, back entrance, store interior, office. And on one screen, 2 figures in dark clothing, faces covered, moving with practiced efficiency towards the rear door. They were not burglars. Burglars do not move like that. These men moved like the customers who came to North Star and bought nothing. They moved like people who had been trained. Grace reached for her phone to call 911, and it rang before she could dial. Nadia's voice was immediate and calm. Do not call the police. If local law enforcement enters that facility, 3 decades of intelligence work are compromised. Stay where you are. Help is 4 minutes out. There are men breaking in upstairs, Grace whispered. I know. They are not after the gas station. They are after the information in that basement. Is the elevator sealed? Yes. Do you have the key? Grace touched her pocket. Yes. Then the passage is secure. It reseals when the elevator descends. They cannot find it without the key. Stay quiet. Stay hidden. Grace watched the monitors and the men breach the back door and move through the store with terrifying speed. One went straight for the office. He ran his hands along the wall exactly where the hidden panel was. He knew. He knew there was something behind that wall. He just could not find the way in. She watched him search, his frustration visible even through the grainy camera feed. His partner entered, and they exchanged words Grace could not hear. Then both men moved back through the store and out the front, disappearing into the darkness beyond the camera's range. 4 minutes later, new figures appeared on the monitors. 3 people moving through the station with the same professional precision, but performing a security sweep rather than a search. The elevator hummed to life, ascending and then descending again. When the doors opened, Grace found herself facing a man in his 60s, distinguished looking, salt and pepper hair. Alert eyes. Ms. Calloway, he said, extending his hand. I am Director Walsh. I worked with your father for 30 years. And in that moment, standing in her father's secret underground facility at 1 a.m, shaking hands with a CIA director, Grace understood with absolute clarity that the $200 million was not a gift. It was a burden. Because the men who had broken in would come back. Because the money was tied to secrets that powerful people would kill to protect or destroy. Because she was now the custodian of 30 years of classified intelligence operations, and there was no version of this inheritance that did not come with danger. The fairy tale was over, and the real story was just beginning. Walsh confirmed what Grace had already started to piece together, but the details were worse than she had imagined. Emmett Calloway had been one of the CIA's most valuable domestic assets. His cover as a humble veteran running a gas station was perfect. For 3 decades, he had facilitated operations that had disrupted weapons trafficking, networks intercepted intelligence leaks, and provided safe harbor for defectors and assets from hostile nations. But Walsh also told her something she was not prepared to hear. Your brother, he said carefully, Russell, his investment firm has been facilitating technology transfers to entities connected to foreign intelligence services. Restricted technology, the kind that requires federal export licenses he never obtained. He has been accepting payments through offshore accounts. Grace felt the floor shift beneath her. And Diane Walsh continued. Her real estate business has been processing transactions for criminal organizations, moving money through property purchases. Large sums, over $100 million in the past 5 years. Grace stared at him. You are telling me my brother and sister are criminals? Walsh's expression was sympathetic but unflinching. Your father discovered it during his final year. He spent his last months compiling evidence. It broke his heart, Grace, but he could not ignore it. The activities were too serious. National security implications. Nadia spoke from behind her. That is why he left everything to you. You are the only one who is not compromised. The only one he trusted to do the right thing with the truth. Grace's mind raced. Russ and Diane pressing her to sell. Their generous offers. Their concern about the station's finances. They were not trying to help her. They were trying to get control of the property before she discovered what was underneath it. Before she found the evidence their father had gathered against them. And then a worse thought struck her. What about Troy? She asked. My ex-husband, his new wife Bridget. Nadia hesitated. We believe Bridget has connections to a foreign intelligence network. We believe she targeted your ex-husband specifically because of his connection to the Calloway family. It is unlikely he knows. Grace felt the information land like a physical weight. Her ex-husband had not left her for love. He had been targeted, chosen, manipulated by a woman who was using him to get closer to Emmett Calloway's family. But none of this mattered as much as what came next. Grace tried to access the offshore accounts her father had described. Following the instructions from his video, she entered the authentication systems, submitted her credentials, provided biometric data. The system rejected her. Unregistered user. Biometric profile not found. The accounts existed. The money was real. But Emmett had never completed the registration process to transfer access to Grace. Perhaps he had run out of time. Perhaps his heart had given out before he could finish. $200 million locked behind systems she could not access. And then the same week, Phil fired her, 3 after unplanned absences in 30 days. She was done. Grace sat in her car outside the diner for 20 minutes after clearing out her locker. A woman with $200 million in theoretical assets and $47 in her checking account. No income. 2 daughters who needed dinner. Rent due in 9 days on an apartment she now needed to move out of because the station's apartment was free but needed work she could not afford. She drove to North Star, parked in the cracked lot, sat in the car while Hazel and June slept in the back seat, exhausted from a long day at school. Grace pulled out her wallet, counted the bills and coins, and arrived at a number that would have been funny if it were not her actual life. $47. She looked up at the North Star sign. The star had faded to almost nothing. The building was dark. Somewhere beneath it, 30 years of secrets sat in a climate-controlled room waiting for a woman who did not know the password. Pop, she whispered, I do not know what you wanted me to do. No one answered, just the sound of her daughters breathing in the back seat. Steady, trusting, unaware of how close they were to the edge. And the next day it got worse. The school called. A woman had arrived at dismissal and attempted to pick up Hazel and June. She was not on the authorized list. The school had followed protocol and refused. The woman left without incident. Grace called Nadia. Who was it? Nadia's voice was tight. An associate of Bridget's. They are getting desperate. Grace looked at her daughters who were watching her from the kitchen table of the cramped apartment, their faces holding that particular stillness of children who know something is very wrong but are not sure what. She had no job, no accessible money. People she could not see were circling her children. Her brother was working with criminals. Her sister was laundering money. Her ex-husband's wife was a foreign operative. And she was supposed to do the right thing. And that is when Grace Calloway, the waitress, the single mother, the family disappointment with $47 to her name, had to make the hardest decision of her life. A decision that would protect her daughters, but would also require her to betray her own blood. And the cost of that decision, she would learn soon enough, was something that no amount of money, not even $200 million, could ever buy back. Now, I need to tell you about a night that Grace Calloway will carry with her for the rest of her life. Not because of what happened during that night, but because of what she chose. And the thing about choices, real choices, the kind that split your life into before and after, is that they do not feel dramatic when you are making them. They feel quiet. They feel like sitting alone at a kitchen table at 2 in the morning, staring at a stack of documents while your daughters sleep 10 feet away, and the only sound is the hum of a refrigerator that needs replacing. Grace had brought the evidence upstairs from the basement. All of it. Printed files, copied drives, her father's meticulous records. She spread it across the table in the apartment above North Star and spent 7 hours reading through the case Emmett Calloway had built against his own children. The evidence against Russ was methodical and damning. Dates, amounts, recipients. Her brother had facilitated the transfer of restricted military communications technology to intermediaries connected to foreign intelligence services. Not once, not accidentally, but systematically over a period of 4 years, accepting payments routed through a chain of shell companies that ended in offshore accounts containing millions. The evidence against Diane was equally precise. Property transactions that looked legitimate on the surface but were structured specifically to convert illicit funds into clean real estate holdings. More than $100 million moved through her brokerage over 5 years, each transaction carefully layered to avoid triggering federal reporting requirements. Diane's commission on these transactions alone was staggering. Grace read it all, every page, every transaction, every name and date and dollar amount. And as she read, she kept seeing things that did not belong in the evidence files. Memories that intruded, uninvited, vivid, merciless. Russ at 14 teaching her to ride a bicycle in the driveway of their childhood home. He had been patient that day. Patient in a way he never was anymore, running alongside her with his hand on the seat until she found her balance, and when she finally pedaled on her own, the look on his face had been pure, uncomplicated pride, as if her small victory was his too. Diane at 16 braiding Grace's hair before the first day of school, her fingers gentle and sure, her voice quiet as she told Grace that middle school was hard, but that Callaways do not break, and that if anyone gave her trouble, Diane would handle it, and she had. For years, Diane had handled it. They had been a family once, not a perfect one, but real, connected by something deeper than money or ambition, something that should have been unbreakable. Grace pushed the memories aside and looked at the evidence again, the numbers, the names, the crimes, and she asked herself the question that her father must have asked himself in his final months, the question that had no right answer. If she turned this evidence over to federal authorities, Russ and Diane would go to prison. 10 years, 15 years, maybe more. Her nieces and nephews would grow up visiting their parents through glass. The Calloway name would be on every news channel, every newspaper, every website that trafficked in scandal and shame. Hazel and June would go to school as the daughters of the woman who put her own siblings in prison. But if she destroyed the evidence, if she walked away, if she accepted Russ's offer of $300,000 for the station and pretended she had never found the basement or the falls or the truth, then she would be safe. The money would be enough for a fresh start, a small house, stability. She could go back to waiting tables, raise her girls in peace, and let Russ and Diane continue whatever they were doing until someone else caught them, or until no one did. Grace picked up her phone. She dialed Russ's number. It rang twice. She was going to say it. She was going to tell him he had won, that she would sign over the station, that she was done fighting over an inheritance she had never asked for. The words were in her mouth. Then June appeared in the doorway of the kitchen, her eyes wide, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, there is someone outside our window, standing there, watching." Grace moved to the window. In the parking lot below, a figure stood in the shadow of the station sign, motionless, looking up at the apartment. As Grace watched the figure turned and walked away, unhurried, disappearing into the darkness beyond the lot's single working light. Grace ended the call without speaking. She pulled June close, feeling her daughter's heartbeat against her own ribs, fast and frightened. And in that moment, Grace understood, with perfect, terrible clarity, what her father had known. The people connected to Russ's deals and Diane's transactions were not the kind of people who walked away. They did not forget. They did not let go. Even if Grace sold the station, even if she destroyed every file, even if she moved to another state and changed her name, they would never be certain she did not know something. They would never stop watching, never stop sending people to stand in parking lots at 2 in the morning, looking up at the windows where her daughter slept. Emmett had understood this. That was why he had spent his final months building the case. Not because he wanted to punish his children, but because the only way to protect Grace and the girls was to remove the threat entirely, to bring the whole operation down even if his own son and daughter went down with it. Her father had not chosen his country over his children. He had chosen his granddaughter's safety over his children's freedom. And now that choice fell to Grace. She did not call Nadia. She did not call Director Walsh. She did not call anyone for guidance or permission or reassurance. At 8:17 the next morning, Grace Calloway walked into the FBI field office in Richmond, Virginia. She carried a box containing copies of every document, every file, every piece of evidence her father had compiled. She asked to speak with someone in the counterintelligence division. She sat in a gray room with fluorescent lighting and gave a statement that took 4 hours. She did not cry during the statement. She had done her crying. What she did with the methodical precision she had inherited from her father was lay out the evidence, clearly answer every question directly, and provide context that only someone who had lived inside the Calloway family could provide. Nadia, when Grace finally called her, was not surprised. "I thought you would do this yourself," she said. "Your father predicted it. He said you would not want anyone to make this decision for you." She was right about that too. The FBI moved fast once they had the evidence. The case Emmett had built was so thorough, so carefully documented, that it required minimal additional investigation. Arrest warrants were issued within 72 hours. They took Russ first. At 6:45 on a Wednesday morning, federal agents arrived at his townhouse in Georgetown. Grace learned later that he had been eating breakfast. Toast and black coffee, the same breakfast their father had eaten every morning. He did not resist. He did not speak. He simply set down his coffee cup and stood up when they told him to. Diane was arrested 20 minutes later at her real estate office. She had apparently been on a phone call with a client discussing a waterfront property listing when the agents walked in. She had asked them to wait until she finished the call. They did not. Bridget was detained separately, picked up by a counterintelligence team at a shopping center where she had been buying shoes. The contrast between the severity of the charges and the banality of the arrest location would have been darkly funny under other circumstances. Troy called Grace that afternoon. His voice was shaking. "Carmen, Grace, they have arrested Bridget. They are saying she is some kind of foreign agent. They have been questioning me for hours. Are you all right? Are the girls safe?" She could hear the genuine confusion in his voice, the bewilderment of a man whose world had been disassembled while he was looking the other way. Troy was many things: selfish, short-sighted, a mediocre father who treated his parental obligations as optional. But he had not known about Bridget. He had not known about any of it. "The girls are safe," Grace told him. "Troy, they are going to need you to be present, really present, not just weekends when it is convenient. They are going to hear things about their family on the news from other kids at school, and they are going to need their father." There was a long pause. Then Troy said something Grace had never heard him say before in 6 years of marriage or 3 years of divorce. "You are right. I am sorry. What do you need me to do?" It was not enough to fix what he had broken, but it was a start. Grace kept the twins home from school the day the arrest went public. By noon, every news outlet in Virginia was covering the story. By evening, it was national. Prominent investment manager and real estate broker arrested on federal charges, technology export violations, financial crimes, connections to foreign intelligence networks. And the detail that made every headline writer's eyes lighted up: the investigation had been initiated by evidence compiled by their own father, a decorated military veteran who had secretly served as a CIA asset for 3 decades. Reporters gathered outside North Star. Grace stayed inside with the girls, grateful for the security measures, Nadia had arranged a single-person discreet positioned at the lot entrance, turning away cameras with quiet authority. Did Grandpa know what they were doing? Hazel asked. She was sitting at the kitchen table, her homework open but untouched, watching footage of Diane being escorted into a courthouse on the small television Grace had set up in the apartment. Yes, Grace said. She had decided early that she would not lie to her daughters about this. They deserved the truth delivered at their level, but the truth, he found out during his last year. It hurt him badly. Is that why he left everything to you? June asked. Because they were the bad guys, Grace considered her answer. They made very bad choices, she said carefully. Serious ones, choices that hurt people and broke laws. But that does not erase the fact that they are family. People are complicated girls. Your uncle taught me to ride a bike. Your aunt braided my hair on my first day of school. Those things were real too. So what happens now? Hazel asked. Now we do the hard thing, Grace said. We keep going. Russ's call came on a Thursday, 11 days after his arrest. Grace was behind the counter at North Star, serving one of the regular intelligence contacts, a retired station chief who came every morning for coffee and a sealed envelope. Her phone rang with an unfamiliar number. She answered, and the automated system informed her she was receiving a call from the federal detention facility. She accepted. Russ did not shout. Grace had been prepared for shouting for rage for the full force of her brother's considerable anger directed at her through a prison telephone. But what came through the line was worse than shouting. His voice was calm, controlled, almost conversational. You know the funny thing, he said, Pop always said you were most like him. I never understood what he meant. You were the dropout, the waitress, the one who could not keep her marriage together. What was there about you that was like him? Grace said nothing. But now I understand. Russ continued, his voice steady as a blade. You are both willing to sacrifice your family for a cause. He believed in his country more than he believed in his children, and you believe in being righteous more than you believe in blood. So congratulations, Grace. You are exactly like him. I hope that keeps you warm at night. The line went dead. Grace set the phone on the counter and stood very still for a long time, looking at nothing, feeling the words settle into her chest like stones dropped into water. Diane did not call. Instead, 3 weeks after the arrest, Grace received a package at the station. No return address. Inside was a stack of photographs. Every family photo Grace had ever given her sister over the years. Birthdays, holidays, the twins' first day of school, Grace and Diane at their mother's memorial service, arms around each other, holding each other up. Every photograph had been torn in half. No note, no explanation needed. The message was absolute and final. Grace sat in her father's chair in the office and held the torn photographs and felt the full weight of what she had done. She had $200 million. Nadia had helped her complete the biometric registration once the FBI confirmed her identity and cleared the security protocols. The accounts were accessible now. The properties were documented. The trust fund was real. She was on paper one of the wealthiest women in Virginia, and she had never felt more alone in her life. Because here's the thing no one tells you about doing the right thing. No one tells you that it feels like loss. The stories always end with the hero standing tall, vindicated, surrounded by the evidence of their righteousness. But the stories leave out the part where the hero sits alone in a small office, above a gas station, holding torn photographs of people who used to love her and wonders whether righteous was worth it. Grace wondered. She did not know the answer. She suspected she never would. In the weeks that followed, Grace visited Russ and Diane at their respective facilities. Once a month without fail. She drove 2 hours each way, waited in processing lines, submitted to searches, and sat in visiting rooms with bolted-down furniture and fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly sick. Russ refused to see her. Every time. The guard would disappear, then return shaking his head. He does not want visitors today. Grace would nod, leave a book or a letter at the desk, and drive home. Diane agreed to one visit. She sat across from Grace in silence for the full 30 minutes, her prison uniform jarring against the memory of designer suits and highlighted hair. She did not speak. She did not look away. She simply stared at Grace with an expression that was worse than hatred because it was emptiness. The complete absence of the sister Grace had known. At the end of 30 minutes, Diane stood up and said one sentence before the guard escorted her back. "You have Pop's money, you have his station, you have his legacy. I hope it is worth what it cost." Then she turned and walked away, and Grace understood that her sister was gone. Not dead, not physically absent, but gone in the way that matters most. The Diane who had braided her hair, who had promised that Callaways do not break, no longer existed for Grace. That door was closed locked from the inside, and no brass key in the world would open it. Grace drove home from that visit and pulled over twice because she could not see the road through her tears. But she kept going because that was what Callaways did, and because her daughters were waiting. The months passed, and Grace built a new life from the wreckage of the old one. She renovated North Star. Not lavishly, but thoughtfully. New pumps, updated inventory, a small coffee counter in the store where she served fresh brew every morning the way her father used to. She kept the prices fair and the hours long. She renamed it Emmett's Station and hung a photograph of her father on the wall behind the register, the one from opening day, his hand on the pump, his smile wide and unguarded. The underground facility continued to function. Nadia helped Grace learn the protocols, the systems, the rhythm of operations her father had managed for decades. Grace proved to be a quick study. Her attention to detail, her ability to read people, her calm under pressure. These were not skills she had learned. They were skills she had always had forged in years of navigating double shifts and custody disputes and landlords who lied about repairs. She had been training for this her whole life without knowing it. The intelligence contacts who depended on North Star accepted her readily. Several told her she reminded them of Emmett, the quiet competence, the steady hands, the way she could make a person feel welcome and safe with nothing more than a cup of coffee and a few honest words. Director Walsh offered her a position with the CIA's Cultural Heritage Protection Program. It was part-time, compatible with running the station and raising her daughters. Her father had written a letter of recommendation before he died describing Grace's integrity and intelligence in terms that made her cry when she read them. She had not known he saw her that way. She accepted the position. Her first assignment helped recover stolen medieval manuscripts from a trafficking network operating across Eastern Europe. The work was quiet, meticulous, deeply meaningful. The kind of work her father would have loved. Troy, cleared of any involvement in Bridges' activities, underwent what Grace could only describe as a reckoning. The discovery that his wife had married him as part of an intelligence operation that she had called his daughter's baggage, while secretly using his family connection to gather information, stripped away every comfortable illusion he had built since the divorce. He did not become a different person overnight. People do not work that way, no matter what the stories say. But he showed up, consistently. He paid child support on time. He attended school events. He stopped canceling weekends. He sat with his daughters and listened to them in a way he had not done since they were small. He and Grace did not reconcile. That bridge had burned years ago, and neither of them wanted to rebuild it. But they found something that might have been better. A steady, functional partnership in raising two girls who needed both parents to be present and reliable. Troy's mother, Patricia, came to visit the station one afternoon. She was a kind woman who had maintained her relationship with Grace and the twins, despite her son's behavior, and who had never fully accepted Bridget. "I always told Troy he was a fool to leave you," Patricia said, sitting at the coffee counter while Grace poured her a cup. "You have Emmett's quiet strength, his backbone. I can see it in you more clearly now than ever." Grace accepted the words and held them carefully, the way you hold something fragile that you did not expect to receive. The twins adapted. Children are remarkable that way. Hazel and June helped in the station after school, stocking shelves, working the register, learning the rhythms of the business their grandfather had built. They painted their room in the apartment upstairs in colors Grace would not have chosen, but that made them happy. They started learning languages, picking up French and German from the books on their grandfather's shelves, as if continuing a tradition they had only just discovered. Russ received 15 years. Diane received 12. Grace sent letters every month. Russ never responded. Diane wrote back once a single line on prison stationery. "Stop writing." Grace did not stop. One evening 6 months after the arrest, Grace was cleaning in the office when she found something she had missed in her earlier searches. A small envelope tucked into the back of a desk drawer she had not fully emptied. Her father's handwriting on the front. Grace. Inside was a letter, Not typed, not formal, not part of any legal document. Just her father's handwriting on lined paper, the kind he used for grocery lists and inventory notes. Grace, if you are reading this, it means you did what I could not do while I was alive. You faced the truth about your brother and sister, and you chose the hard road. I am sorry. I am sorry I put this weight on your shoulders. I am sorry I was not brave enough to carry it myself while I still could. I kept telling myself I would handle it, that I would find the right time, the right way. But the truth is I was afraid, afraid of losing them, afraid that if I turned in my own children, it would mean I had failed as a father. And maybe I did fail. I do not know, but I know this. You did not fail, Grace. You did the hardest thing a person can do. You chose what was right over what was easy, even though it cost you the people you love. I am proud of you. I have always been proud of you, even when you could not see it, even when you could not feel it, especially then. Pop, Grace folded the letter. She placed it in her shirt pocket over her heart. She did not cry. She had cried enough. This letter was not a reason for tears. It was a reason to stand up straighter. She went downstairs and checked the store. Everything was in order. The shelves stocked the coffee, fresh, the lights working. The evening's last intelligence contact had come and gone, a brief exchange handled with the competence Emmett would have expected. She locked the front door and turned off the store lights. In the parking lot, the new Emmett Station sign glowed against the darkening sky. The star logo, redesigned by Hazel, was bright white on navy blue, sharp and clear, and visible from the road in a way the old sign had not been for years. Beside the front door, Grace had installed a small brass plaque. She walked to it now and rested her fingers against the raised letters. Emmett Calloway, veteran, entrepreneur, patriot. His greatest legacy was not what he owned, but what he stood for. She stood there for a while, feeling the cool metal under her fingertips, listening to the night sounds of rural Virginia. Crickets, a distant car, the wind moving through the trees that lined the back of the property. Footsteps on the stairs behind her. Mom, who are you talking to? Grace turned. Hazel stood in the doorway in pajamas, squinting against the porch light, her hair messy from the pillow. Grandpa, Grace said. Hazel nodded, as if this were perfectly normal, as if talking to dead grandfathers were something all mothers did at 9:30 on a Tuesday night. Then she padded back upstairs and Grace heard the apartment door close softly behind her. Grace looked up. The sky over Virginia was clear tonight and the stars were out. Thousands of them scattered across the darkness like someone had thrown a handful of light against the ceiling of the world. And there, almost directly above the station's sign, one star burned brighter than the rest. Grace stood beneath it and breathed. She thought about her father, about the life he had lived in this small, ordinary place doing extraordinary things in silence, about the fortune he had accumulated and the modesty he had maintained and the terrible secret he had carried about his own children, about the letter in her pocket and the torn photographs in the box upstairs and the brother who would not see her and the sister who had told her to stop writing. She thought about her daughters sleeping above her safe and warm, growing into the kind of women Emmett would have loved. About the station humming quietly around her, its surfaces clean, its purpose intact, its secrets kept. She thought about the $200 million she had barely touched, about the scholarship fund she had established in her father's name for children of veterans, about the work she was doing to recover stolen artifacts and return them to the places they belonged. She thought about the $47. There had been a night not so long ago when that was all she had. $47 and two sleeping daughters and a faded gas station sign and no idea what to do next. And she had sat in her car in the same parking lot and whispered to a dead man for help. No one had answered, but someone had already left the answer, tucked inside an envelope, hanging from a brass key, hidden in plain sight. Grace Calloway, the waitress, the dropout, the family disappointment, the woman with $47 in a broken car and a uniform stained with someone else's breakfast. She was still all of those things, but she was also her father's daughter, and that in the end was enough. She whispered into the quiet night one last time, "I did not let you down, Pop." Then she went inside, locked the door, checked on her daughters, and went to sleep in the small apartment above the gas station that her father had built, where the secrets were deep, but the foundation was solid, and where the star on the sign burned bright enough to see from the road, bright enough to guide someone home if they knew where to look.